white woman is a secret Marxist plant. She was a secret Marxist in college and decided to run on the Libertarian Party ticket in 1996, and then has just been biding her time these last 30 years, waiting for her moment to strike and make the Libertarian Party liberal. Don't insult my intelligence. Jo Jorgensen is not some Marxist plant, and if you said that, you looked foolish. And then you got mad when people said you looked foolish. And they were mad because you're contributing to call-out culture, which was stupid. Instead of saying, I'm going to offer some grace to the Libertarian Party presidential candidate and ask her to clarify what she believed in a polite manner.
Which she did.
She did. But it took a lot of screeching to get there.
Yeah, it's the same cancel culture that they complain about. That they spend all of their time fighting and arguing about identity politics. And then Tom Woods retweets some guy today who says, something about black people and capitalism. Black people should be capitalists. And it's like, aren't you retweeting out the same identity politics that you say you don't like? Eric July does the same thing where he talks about.
We can end it there. So let me say, as you said, if you said that, then you looked foolish. I guess my issue with that would be that I never said that or anything close to it. I honestly, Chris, I don't. I want to say that you're straw manning me, but I don't even think this technically counts as a straw man. It's just a flat out inaccuracy. I don't know if you heard from somebody that I had said Jo Jorgensen was a secret Marxist, or that I said that I was telling my fans to attack that woman for having Marxist beliefs. I've covered this pretty in depth, what my issue with the tweet was. And I said at least a dozen times on the show that Jo Jorgensen is not a Marxist. And when people accused me of saying that, I said, this is ridiculous, and anyone saying that is retarded. That's not my issue. And so I don't know where you got that I was telling my fans to attack Jo Jorgensen for being a Marxist from.
Well, first, I agree with you. And let me just say, I'm sorry. I think as I've gone and done a deeper dive in preparation for this and thought more deeply about this stuff, that particular comment was not fair to you. And I think that my criticism of what I would say your faction, right, which I consider you to be a large voice in, and I can't imagine you disagree with that, is it kind of breaks out into three different camps. There is the podcaster class, you and Tom and Eric, and guys that do a lot of good and I have a lot of respect for, especially Tom Woods. Like I almost never say anything bad about Tom because I've learned so much from him. And then there is the institutions. There's the Mises Caucus and there's the Mises Institute. And what is typically done against them is the lifting of quotes. I can't say that I've listened to your podcast a lot until the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so what you see is sort of the fakertarian stuff being pulled and the poll quotes. You see this or that. And you know how it is when you pull a clip or you pull an image or a tweet or whatever, you take it out of context and you present that as that just is who that person is, right? So, I mean, in the lead up to this, when you posted that I was coming on, that's what the Mises Caucus did in that entire thread. He's just a left libertarian. Here's this thing from a different writer who's not, and so it is easy to get an opinion formed of an organization or a podcaster based on a couple different things. First, other people's interpretation of that information, and it's easy to misinterpret that when you don't pay attention to what they're doing. Second is the people who have an axe to grind, the Mike Shipleys of the world who come after you because they don't agree with our fundamental beliefs, in terms of like property rights. They're out for, they have a different game that they're playing. So I think it's easy to misinterpret what people say because of that third rung, which is you work in media, I work in media, and when you say something like that, I'll give you an example. The Hoppe episode with you and Malice, I had a completely different interpretation of what that was going to be before I listened to it and then after. So what I see from the outside perspective, who is not a part of the Mises Caucus and doesn't consider myself a part of that faction, is totally different than when I engaged in that content. What I heard was you interpreting Hoppe in a very succinct, clear way, and Malice making a lot of points that I was like, oh, yeah, I agree with that. And he's, talking about a lot of things. There was a lot in there that I agreed with, for instance. But what you don't get that impression when it's extrapolated out, right? And so when you say something, if a broadcaster says something, they say X, it gets amplified over and over and over and over in Facebook groups, on Twitter, and it's that game of telephone that eventually starts to completely distort the message. And there are a lot of people who tend to twist things for their own personal gain one way or the other. So first, I apologize to you because that's what happened. I completely misinterpreted what you were saying about Joe. While I did take exception with your reaction to her, we can talk about that.
Sure.
But
well, look, I appreciate that. I really do. And it's like water under the bridge. That's fine. It's like you got it wrong, and I appreciate the apology. It's just, it gets frustrating because, as you mentioned, with this small group of people who come at me all the time, it's quite often the case that they will take the most controversial sentence that you said and try to, and then flat out lie about it. And like you said, it's like this game of telephone. I saw someone sent me a clip the other day where when it gets to a point, someone called into, it's Freedom Talk. There's the show in New Hampshire. It's like
Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live, yes. They called into Free Talk Live, and they were like, I don't know, this Dave Smith guy is like, he's a complete neocon. I mean, he was saying that Chelsea Manning and Snowden should be locked up. And I'm like, dude, I've never even said anything remotely critical of Chelsea Manning or Ed Snowden or the other one was Assange. These guys are heroes to me. Like I've never said anything, and so it comes back, and I'm like, when I see the reflection, I'm like, I don't know who this person is, but it's definitely not me. So I appreciate that.
And can I ask you something about that? Because I tend to think, because when I basically I support the idea of the Mises Caucus. I just don't think that they're living up to their promise, and we'll get to that. But
sure,
I tend to think that when I watch what you do on social media, or what Tom does, or Eric, it's easy to get that echo chamber starts to become your panel. Malice talked about Cernovich looking at his 600,000 Twitter followers, and you gather all this information. Is there a part of what you're doing where you're so constantly bombarded by criticism that that starts to become the lens that you're looking through?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, truthfully speaking, I'm not constantly bombarded by criticism. I go back and forth with people on Twitter, so I think people see that stuff. There's a group of about 10 people who respond to just about everything I tweet. Almost every day they tweet at me, and I'd say, I mean, even if you ask them if they're being honest, which I don't count on them to be, maybe about 5% of what they tweet at me, I'll respond back to.
Right.
And it is very much I was talking about this when I was on Kokesh's show the other day. It's very much within my personality to I'm open to the fight. If you want to come at me and mock me and call me names, okay, fine, let's do this. And I enjoy that in a weird way, probably more than I should. But I don't throw bombs at any of these other groups. I remember this is a random example, but Tupac. As I think of myself as the libertarian Tupac. So I remember Tupac said when he got shot, in the early 90s, 5 times in New York City. And he said in an interview once that he didn't believe any black person could hurt him because he was their representative. And he was like, I speak for you. So I'm on your, I'm for your cause. So you would never shoot me. And
Right.
So he actually went to take the gun from the guy. Like, he was like, you're not going to shoot me. And the guy shot him in the hand and then shot him 4 more times. And he was like, I can't believe it. These guys actually shot me. And truthfully speaking, I feel that way to some degree with libertarians. Like, from the very beginning of this, I was like, well, the libertarians aren't going to have a problem with me. Like, I speak for them. I'm nothing but their advocate. And so that was kind of my attitude in the beginning. When we first started supporting Jacob Hornberger, that's when I first started getting like this crowd known as the Loser Brigade, talking all this wild shit about me. And at the time, I used to go back and forth a little bit with them. Like, they'd tag me in some of these groups on Facebook. I don't even know what any of these groups are, but they'd tag me in something criticizing me. And my attitude was always like, I'd treat them with nothing but like, good intent. I'd say like, hey, listen, maybe you don't like me or you don't like Tom Woods, but take a look at Jacob Hornberger. I bet you'll like him. I mean, he's open borders. He's for, like all the, like, you're not going to find any of these issues with him. So go support that guy. I thought I didn't think it would go in the direction it did, but much like with Nick Sarwark, look, I wouldn't know who Nick Sarwark was to this day if he hadn't started attacking Tom Woods and Jeff Dice and people who I love in a vicious manner. I could not, this is the truth, okay? This is the extent of how involved in the party I am. I don't know the name of the current chair. If you put a gun to my head, I think there's a bishop in it. I can't tell you the rest of the name. If you put a gun to my head and said, name the chair before Nick Sarwark, I'm going to die. There is no chance I could tell you who the chair was before. And the same is true with this other group of people. I wouldn't know who any of them are, except that they launch these vicious attacks. And so, okay, I'll respond to them. And more so, the fact that they attack people who I love, who I know are really good people and who are heroes of mine, that triggers me a little bit. But so that's more or less my take on the whole situation. That's
the sense that I get. And I sense you're kind of searching for like, why am I being singled out in this way? Because it's got to be awkward and odd. Like, and so I feel you're fair and honest. Otherwise you wouldn't have Kokesh on, you wouldn't have me on. But that's part of the breakdown, is that the Sarwarks and those of us who are outside of the, I heard you talk in your talk about being called a cult. And you're like, well, what are you talking about? Well, those of us who are outside of it, that third rung, that group of people that amplify what you guys say, they mimic that breakneck style and they beat the shit out of the rest of us. And then because they're usually anonymous Twitter account users, there's no accountability for those people. So people tend to just blame you and Tom and Eric because they're like, well, somebody's got to be responsible for this asshole who won't leave me alone. Because when you tend to criticize anything Mises or Ron Paul related, you get a swarm of several dozen, if not hundreds, of Twitter accounts. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but that creates a tremendous amount of resentment. And I think what the Mises caucus is experiencing is resentment from people like myself who have been around for a long time that don't understand that resentment and just are caught off guard by the criticism.
Okay, but in the same sense that in the clip that we just played, which I grant that you apologized for, and that's fine. But in the clip you played, what you explicitly say is like, hey, if you're getting criticism online, if people are saying what you said is stupid, maybe you should look at that and like take that in and go, okay, there are these people criticizing you. But then on the other hand, when other people get criticized online, it's like my fault that people. I understand you're not saying it's my fault.
I'm not saying that's fair. I'm saying that's why you get the blame.
This is the thing, okay? What the people who go, it's like the Mises Caucus are like a cult, or they're Dave bots or whatever. It's blatantly not true. There are people who disagree with me in the Mises Caucus. Every time I talk to Michael Heiss on the phone, at least 2 or 3 times in the conversation, he'll say, well, I disagree with you there. Let me give you some pushback on this. Like they don't just agree with me all the time, but the fact that a lot of them do agree with me doesn't make them cult members. I mean, it's a very convenient tactic. And it's a very convenient tactic to say, I'm going to challenge Dave on this. And then if someone agrees with Dave, well, they're just a cult member. But if someone agrees with me, oh, that's completely fair, and that just proves that I'm right and that Dave really should take a look in the mirror or whatever. I mean, that just seems like, to me, that seems childish and just it's a heads I win, tails you lose game. And look, in terms of like people being shitty on Twitter and YouTube comments, believe me, I've asked people not to be shitty in those environments. Twitter and YouTube comments are cesspools. That's kind of the nature of the world today. There are, by the way, to the Loser Brigade members who call me things like fucking a Nazi sympathizer, or one of them said recently that I praise Holocaust deniers. Like, I'm a fucking Jew whose family was slaughtered in the Holocaust. If you're calling me that, I really don't care what you get back. Like, you lose the ability to say, oh, people are being mean to me on Twitter. Like, you're engaging in that game, and if they give it back to you, I'm actually fine with that. But in general, if people are coming with good faith criticism, people shouldn't be shitty to them. But the other thing that happens, and this is the nature of anybody who's got any amount of a following, is that you got a few people out there who are more dickish than the others, and they end up being what you focus on. So, for example, right, this is just one example that is in my head for whatever reason. So I tweeted out something about when the feds were rounding up people in Seattle. Was it Portland? No, it was in Seattle when there were the Department of Homeland Security goons coming in and grabbing people. I tweeted something out very critical of that. And I said, I was like, look, this is a really terrifying precedent to set. This is the worst way for the government to handle it, for it to be coming down from the feds. This is, even if you're critical of the riots, as I am, you got to have some concern over this. And there was maybe a dozen people who responded to it like, fuck that, they're commies, they get what they deserve. But the tweet got like 2,000 or 3,000 likes or something in that range. I don't remember exactly. And so a bunch of the Loser Brigader types started jumping on that, like, look, even when Dave's right, look at his fan base. They're awful. They just hate commies, and they're just anti-left, and they're authoritarian and all of this. But they're looking at the dozen people who said this and ignoring that, like, you could, with a stronger argument, look at that and go, oh, look, thousands of people agreed with what Dave said on this. So it's just a very convenient, very dishonest line of attack, in my opinion, to kind of say, okay, yeah, look, there are going to be some people out there, and that's not what I promote, but that's the internet.
Well, yeah, I mean, 10 to 20% of any audience that I've ever worked with of any size is just fucking insane, like literally just batshit crazy. And I think one of my goals in coming here, because there's a very real danger for me coming here, because if you see the Mises Caucus group, it's like I've been working to build a brand for 10 years from scratch, no funding from anybody other than my listeners. And there's a very real chance that the 10 to 20% of insane people in your audience network affect me into just being the next Sarwark or part of the Loser Brigade. And that's not why I'm here. I genuinely care about the libertarian movement, and I think you do too. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having these conversations. And part of what I want to get across to you and to some of the other Mises Caucus guys is that your message is being completely obliterated by the people in your camp, that it's not a few dozen people, like it's hundreds of people. So we just did a survey of our audience. We've got this new project that we're working on, and we did a survey, and like of 100 people, and it's literally like 3 pages of highlights of the reason I don't want to be a libertarian is because of the abuse, because of the alt-right paleos, because the racism in the comments that go unchecked. And I'm certainly not holding you accountable for anything that like an individual says on a comment section on Instagram, for instance. That's insane. But there is some effect in an audience. When you do the Loser Brigade stuff, other people feel licensed to do that sort of thing, and they don't do it as well as you. And they feel a sense of permission that I can abuse somebody who seems left, right? It then becomes a cudgel that they use to attack other people. And so I've just learned over time with my audience, because I used to pick a lot of fights too. Like, name a libertarian, I fought with them. Never do a podcast in the middle of a divorce. I have a lot of mea culpas to make. I'm starting with you. But I have a responsibility to try and build a movement that is more open to people that don't share my experience. And if I have any criticism of the Mises Caucus, it is that they tend to look at people who don't share their experience and dismiss that and say, we don't want them to be a part of this movement. And that's where it becomes very difficult to do my job, to go out and talk to people who, you know, like, go look at any post on any libertarian think tank yesterday about women's suffrage, and you see the just misogynistic shit that is said on those posts, and you click on those accounts and you look and you see Rothbard, Mises, Dave Smith, Tom Woods. And so people eventually start to draw the conclusion that you guys support that kind of stuff. And then they start to look at the comments, the fakertarian comments, and they start to draw conclusions. And like that I think, if I were to lay anything at your doorstep, it is how you build an audience with some of that stuff, because the punching the enemy, the turning the left libertarian into an enemy thing, you do it with skill because you're a skilled communicator and a comedian, but it gives license to other people that take it so far, and I'm talking to thousands of people take it so far that they eventually are hurting your reputation. They're hurting the effectiveness of the caucus, and it's becoming, you know, then they don't get checked, right? Then there's well, fuck those guys. They're all just losertarians anyways. They're LOL libertarians or whatever they're called. Like, and it starts to diminish your credibility and your effectiveness. And I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know, you know, to say that it's like this is going to lead to a whole bunch of people being turned off and it diminishes my credibility. I got to say, I don't really see it. I think that, look, personally, like, my influence and credibility, I think, has done nothing but go up every single year. And I've got lots of metrics, just like Spike Cohen. I've got lots of metrics that indicate that. And if what you care about is the liberty movement, as you said it is, and I believe you, I have a tough time believing that a lot of these other types who criticize me, the dozen of them or so, actually care about the liberty movement. These are people who want whatever they deem to be the right paleo libertarians, which I guess they would consider me one of. And look, I don't really consider myself a right-wing libertarian. I don't consider myself right. I actually agree with Walter Block. I think we're kind of the third leg on the stool, and there's a lot that distinguishes us from both the left and the right. But if you want to call me that, like, fine, whatever. You know, I've certainly called people left libertarians who don't identify as left, so I'll take the right libertarian label. So they want to get rid of me. They want me out of the movement and the audience that I represent. They want Tom Woods out of the movement. They want Ron Paul out of the movement. They want Jeff Dice out of the movement. They want Michael Heiss out of the movement. They want Eric July, Maj Touré. I'm sure I'm missing a few. If you take all of those people out of the movement and the audiences that they represent, there is no movement left. Like that, you could argue there is no liberty movement really to speak of right now, period. That we're kind of talking to the remnant and trying to build it back up to where it was, you know, in 2012. But you know, if your goal is to kind of get rid of all of these people, I don't really see what we have left to speak of. So, and I'm not saying that that's your goal, but it certainly is the goal of a lot of the other types that you're talking about.
No, I would agree with you on that. I think that there are a lot of those critics who do want to push you guys out.
Yes, listen, I have basically, and the funny thing, so I started this show in late 2012, and I don't even know if those episodes are up in the archives. I think it's in 2013 when we went to Stand Up Labs when we started. I don't even know if we saved those old episodes, and there was like no audience. I built this thing up year over year. So I came in right as the liberty movement was dwindling, right as things were kind of, Ron Paul left presidential politics and there wasn't nearly as much energy. And I have been bringing in thousands and thousands of people to the liberty movement since then. I have gotten Mises and Rothbard and Tom Woods and Bob Murphy and all these people, their books in the hands of a lot of people. That's been, my goal is always to spread the liberty movement. And then for the last, year or so, I've really made a push for people to join the Libertarian Party. And that's when all of this stuff happened, because it's not so much, I think there's a lot of people who enjoy their little comfortable positions in the Libertarian Party. party and didn't like that there's a lot of other people coming in and bringing new people in. And look, no question, are some of them a little rough around the edges? All right, sure. I'm very willing to have very uncomfortable, very politically incorrect conversations and to try to find truth within those areas. And I'm not saying that I defend some random misogynistic comment, but if we're talking about women's suffrage, I'm fine with questioning what the actual results of that were. I'm fine with questioning in general expanding voting rights and whether this is actually that good, whether it's really a good thing for libertarians for libertarianism to have more democracy. Does that really help? Is it really worthwhile for us? Look, when you have someone like Bernie Sanders proposing voting rights for felons and violent felons, is that something libertarians should really be for? Violent criminals having a say in how their fellow neighbor is ruled? Certainly doesn't seem to me like something libertarians should be for. And I'll tell you, much like Ron Paul, and this is what I wish, I really try to smack this into a lot of the LP types' heads. The only time there was a liberty movement in my lifetime was when Ron Paul was willing to say the bravest, most courageous things to a room that he knew very well might boo him out of that room. And what I see from libertarians a lot these days is trying to say the thing that couldn't possibly get you booed out of the room. And listen, just like with Ron Paul, people respond to courage. They respond to somebody who believes in something and is willing to take the name calling. Like, okay, yeah, Ron Paul's a traitor to his country because he doesn't support the troops, because he said, you know what, they hate us because of what our troops have done, not because we're free. And I am just not willing to lie in order to say something that will make sure that I'm not called any of the names. I enjoy going into controversial areas. You know, I saw Spike Cohen, something you tweeted actually, that Spike Cohen's response to what we should do about cutting welfare. And what he said was, he goes, well, look, here's the truth. And I know this from going door to door. Nobody wants to be on welfare. No one wants to be on welfare. People want to work. And it's just that government makes it so hard for them to work. And that's why they end up being on welfare. That sounds really nice. It's a really nice sounding thing to say, and I wish that was the world. But it's not. It's just not. And I don't know how much, like, I'm not from, I remember on the show I listened to, you said that you're from, you know, an area that's like 95% white, and that it was until later in life that you got out. I grew up in Brooklyn in the 90s. I know, listen, it's not that like, oh, everyone fits into these groups. I've known black nerds and white junkies. I know one black dude who was my best friend in like the 5th, 6th, and 7th grade went to Harvard. My sister's best friend, this girl is now identifies as a guy. I've just grown up knowing a lot of different people. I also knew a lot of people from the hood. If you think there are no people who want to be on welfare and who are gaming the system and brag about it, it's a nice thought. It's just not true. It's just not reality. And people, if you say things like that, you get attacked a little bit more and criticized. But I don't care, because I'm willing to tell the truth. My mother was she's a psychologist. She was in the 90s. She worked in the hospital. I don't want to give out too much of her information, but she worked in a hospital in one of the worst areas in New York City, one of the highest crime areas. And it was, in the 90s, I mean, crime was through the roof. It was a fucking nightmare. She would see children and their parents and determine whether or not they need to be taken away by the state. It was and made like no money while she was doing it. She could tell you horror stories about how people have children for what they used to call the budget. That you get a budget when you have a kid, and you get more of a budget for each kid you have. Now, if we want to honestly start talking about what the solutions are to try to fix some of these incredibly damaged cultures, because it's horrible what's happening to these children there. Like, if you actually care about those kids, you have to have like honest, difficult conversations. And in 2020, if you do that, you get called all of the names. But I think libertarians need to stop being afraid of that.
don't think that it has anything to do with, the word pandering or virtue signaling gets thrown around a lot. And I generally think that's a very condescending, dismissive term, because you just related your personal interpretation of the world through your experiences, your information, what you've taken in. Spike has a completely different set of information that he's judging from. And that is...
Yeah, but we're talking about objective reality. I mean, it's not as simple as like my interpretation or Spike's interpretation. Spike said no one wants to be on welfare. That is an objective claim that is objectively false. So yes, you're right. We have different perspectives, obviously. I'm just talking about what is objectively real and what is not. Now, that's not to say that it's fair for me to say, everybody wants to be on welfare, or I think that's very much true. And by the way, I agree with Spike's policy proposals. Like, absolutely. Let's make it much easier for people to, be entrepreneurs and get jobs, and let's not criminalize things that shouldn't be criminalized. Let's not make them jump through hoops. But I also think we should be honest. And I agree with you, and I'm probably guilty of accusing other people of pandering. I know when people accuse me of pandering to the alt-right or whatever, which I think is absurd. Dog whistling. It's like
the virtue signaling. Yes.
Well, it also, again, just like with the cult worship stuff, it becomes a very convenient childish trick where you can say, okay, well, I don't actually have him saying anything that I object to, but I'm going to tell you that he's really saying something that you can object to, even though it's not there. Now, you could pick out pretty easily. I mean, I've done thousands of interviews and podcasts and all types of different things. And, certainly, almost 1,000 episodes of Part of the Problem. I forget exactly where we are. But you could, I'm sure, find 5 or 6 different things that a right-winger would like, or, a lot more than that. But you could find things that I've said that a right-winger would like. You could also find a lot of things that I've said that a right-winger would hate. And you can say, like, all Dave cares about is bringing in, alt-righters or whatever. Okay, but I also go on Jimmy Dore's show. I just went on Ben Burgess's show. I've gone on Rogan's show 4 times. I'm trying to bring in anybody I can. I'm actually pretty good at messaging libertarianism to the left as well. So I don't know. I get your point on that, but whether it's pandering or not, just to kind of come back full circle to what we were talking about, my issue with the Joe Jorgensen Black Lives Matter tweet never had anything to do with her being a secret Marxist. And in fact, the Marxism of the organization Black Lives Matter is really the least of my concerns right now. Like, I don't really care that much. I mean, I did one episode with Pete Quinones about the Marxist organization. I think it's an interesting topic to know a little bit about, and libertarians should know about this stuff. But really, that's not my issue. When Joe Jorgensen says she's supporting the movement, not the organization, I'm like, okay, I can understand that. My problem is with the movement. It's not with the organization. And my problem, for anyone who listens to the show, there's no way you could not know what it is. My problem is the dozens of murders, the hundreds of vicious assaults, the thousands of businesses that have been damaged, looted, graffitied on, and the thousands of people who have been terrorized. I mean, go follow Andy No on Twitter. Every day there's a new, just stomach-turning video of somebody being viciously assaulted, and it's all being done in the name of Black Lives Matter. Now, you can agree with the peaceful protesters, and you can agree that the police brutality is horrible, but if you just say, I support the movement, oh, and by the way, it's not good enough if you're not racist, you must be anti-racist, that sends quite a message out there, which I think is really bad messaging. And that's my critique. It's,
bad messaging for whom? Because the majority of people, the majority of Americans, which Joe Jorgensen is trying to reach, are in agreement with the general idea of Black Lives Matter. They're against racism. The campaign is trying to reach a broader audience than just the people that you are trying to reach. And people who watch Andy No videos all day long and just bathe in the Marxist element of Black Lives Matter, it's not about the Marxist element.
It's not about the Marxist element. It's about the violent element. I don't care if somebody's in a room reading Das Kapital and talking about how we should, share the means of production. I don't care about that.
The point still stands. It is I understand your point about the attacks, but when Jorgensen sends out that tweet, she's not signaling to leftists, which is what the majority of the criticism, maybe not you, but the majority of the criticism of that tweet was that she's pandering to leftists, when in reality, the majority of America agreed with the general spirit of that tweet.
Yes, I agree with you.
They're not sophisticated.
Yes, the majority of America agrees with the idea that racism is bad. That's why it's absurd when we're constantly lectured about how we live in a white supremacist society. Yes, the majority of Americans are against racism. However, there's a lot of polling data to suggest that actually the Black Lives Matter thing, shockingly, as the riots continue, is getting less and less popular. And the truth is that people are incredibly turned off by the woke lecturing about racism. And I don't think, yes, I understand the goal of the Jorgensen-Cohn campaign is to attract more people. That's what I want them to do. The reason I'm criticizing them is I think they're doing a very bad job of it.
So I want to go back to the Libertarian Party stuff. I want to jump back because this is, you said that you don't know much about the Libertarian Party, and you basically said Ron Paul is the Libertarian movement, and that's just not true.
Well, no, but hold on. What I said was that the only time we had a really substantial movement going in this country was when Ron Paul was running for president, and I do believe that's true.
Okay, all right. I appreciate that clarification. When one of the problems with the Mises Caucus is that when they came into the party in 2018, they have to, I don't think that they understand everything that came before and everything that the way that they talk, the way that they message, how it turns off people that they need to build coalitions within the party, which is part of why you're getting criticism. When they came in, the takeover language that you just used and the takeover language that Heise continually uses, we're going to take this party over, when in reality, most